Hey everybody, we're back in the garage and I've got another how-to for you. This how-to is how to spool up a bait casting reel. So you've been to the store, you've went to Bass Pro, you've picked you out a brand new bait casting rod and reel. Now you're home and you're ready to spool it up and you're not sure exactly the best way to get started. Maybe this is your first bait caster, maybe you've bought a bunch and you're just trying to learn a different way to do it. I want to show you the way that I spool up a bait casting reel all the way from the bottom up and just go through a few of the steps that I really like to do. On any reel, bait caster or spinning reel, I always use some backing line. Backing line just allows me to not have to fill the spool completely with the line that I plan on using, whether that's a smaller diameter or whatever it may be. I never am fishing to where with the point where I'm gonna outcast all of my line. I'm never gonna, cast all of that off the spool. I'm always gonna have more line on there than that. So the point of that backing is just to not waste as much line and to fill up the spool a little bit before I actually put the line on there that I'm gonna be using. That's something also, if you're new to fishing a bait caster, you're gonna get some backlashes. It doesn't matter if you're new or not, you're gonna get some backlashes. So getting some backlashes with a completely full spool of the line that you want to be using can get pretty expensive pretty quick. We all know how expensive fluorocarbon is, so it's always a good idea to put some backing on there in that situation. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to run my line through just my first guide on that rod. I've actually got it laid across it. I want to have it coming off this side. That's where my spool is, but I'm going to run my line just through this guide, and then I'm going to run it onto the line guide on the reel and pull myself a little bit of slack through there. And now I'm going to take and cut a small piece of tape. I happen to have masking tape handy. I don't care, honestly, if it's masking tape. Electrical tape works really well, but you just need a small piece of tape. And I'm going to narrow it down just a little bit so it's a little bit narrower than the spool. So I've got just this little small piece of tape. And now unlike this carbon light reel, it's got some holes that run through that spool. I'm going to run the line through those holes and I'm going to turn the reel handle just a little bit, but I'm actually going to lay that piece of tape across the line, across that braided line, because what will happen, even if you try to tie an overhand knot with that braid, it's still going to want to slip. And that tape gives it something to bite into. So I've got that piece of tape pushed on there really good. It's got that line down under it. And now the first couple turns of the reel handle, I'm not going to put a lot of pressure. I'm just going to get a few loops over top of that piece of tape with that braided line just to get it started here nice and easy. So I'm just going to click it in gear, turn it 2 or 3 times. It's laying on there kind of loose. Now I'm just going to pull it a little bit more snug as I start turning that reel handle. Once I've got 3 or 4 more turns, I'm going to hold good pressure on it. I'll tighten the drag up here just a little bit. Now I've got 8 or 10 turns on the reel handle, a full spread of line across the spool there. I can let it rip now. So we're going to fill it up some, and then I'm going to stop again and show you just how much backing I put on there before I go ahead and fill this up the rest of the way with fluorocarbon. So I'm going to fill it what I would call about halfway. This braid that I'm actually using, a 65-pound test to fill this up. That's a pretty big, pretty heavy diameter braid. I just want something to take up the space on there. You know, if you had some old line off of another reel, you had a bait caster or a spinning rod you needed to change the line on anyways, man, take that junk line, put it on here, use that as your backing. You certainly don't have to use new line as your backing. So I've got it about halfway up. And I'm actually going to put 17-pound test on here. So I want to leave a little bit more room. If I was going to put like 12 on here or 10-pound test on this reel, I would put a little bit more backing on there just so I don't have to take so much of that thinner diameter. But knowing I'm going to put 17, I'm only going to fill it about halfway before I go ahead and stop with the backing and fill it up the rest of the way with the fluorocarbon. So just cut that off. 14, that one's 20. Oh, here we go, here's some 17. So I use a lot of 17-pound test throughout the course of the year. Use it for a lot of different techniques: buzz baits, bladed jigs, spinner baits, swim jig on occasion. I end up going through a lot of 17-pound test fluorocarbon throughout the year. So now to attach my backing line to my main spool line, I'm going to make a really simple knot right here. I'm going to tie an overhand knot, just laying those two lines together. I'm just going to tie those up, go over and right back through. One single overhand half hitch, whatever you want to call that. That's all I do to join those two lines together. Because listen, I have no intentions of ever using this down to that point. I just want something that's really simple, really easy to tie up right now. I don't need to put a lot of pressure on it. The first wrap or two that it's on the reel, I need to give it just a little bit of slack, just go easy with it. But once it's on there a couple times, then I'm able to give that, just put some pressure on that line again and fill the spool up the rest of the way. One thing that just happened right here, so I'll show you that knot ended up going all the way over, just the way the line guide was. It's all the way over on the edge of the spool. I don't really like that. So I'm going to pull it back off, and I'm actually going to try to get it centered up in the spool just a little bit. When it's all the way over against the edge, a lot of times it wants to hump the line up on it. And so I'm just going to pull that back off, pull it back out a little bit, and try it again. Try to get that pretty close to the edge again. There we go. Now it's almost dead center. That knot is almost dead center. I just like it being in the middle of the reel a little bit better. I've had times where it being on the edge, it wants to constantly poke through. So having that knot a little bit more center of the spool, I just like the way that the reel ends up filling up better after that. I'm gonna spool this up. Now on a bait caster, if you're newer to a bait caster, I would tell you to not fill that spool completely up. Leave you a good 1/8 of an inch or so at the top of the spool, and you'll get a lot less backlashes, and the ones you get won't go as deep. It's just, man, it just works out that way. That if you're new to it, I would definitely encourage you to do that. If you're experienced, it's good to fill that spool up most of the way, because it does a couple different things. You've got more line on there to make a little bit longer cast, but it also increases the gear ratio of your reel. So think of it just like the tire on your truck or on your car. The bigger that tire is, the more line that could go around it. The smaller it is, the smaller diameter that spool is with less line on it, the less line it's going to take every single time that you go around that spool. So even though the gears are spinning the same, that diameter being that much bigger is going to take up a lot more line every single turn of the reel handle. So that is where I typically fill my spools up to. You could get another 4, 5, 6 turns on there, but I don't completely max them out. I like to leave just a little bit of space there. Seems to me like if I completely max them out, I'm more likely to get worse backlashes and end up having to cut that last 20 feet, 30 feet of line out anyway. So that's how I spool up a bait caster. I'm going to take it, run the line through the rest of these guides here, and probably tie on a spinner bait to get ready to go fishing tomorrow. But I hope that helped you learn the way that I spool up a bait caster. I hope it helps you out next time you're headed out on the water.